started off as a physicist in Cambridge. I then worked as an exploration geophysicist in the Sahara for a couple of years, looking for oil and so on, and then changed to medicine. And I worked a bit in the States. I trained at St Mary's Hospital in London, worked in the States a bit, was going to go into hospital medicine, and then decided to go into general practice and change to that. I did about 30 years as a GP in central London, and in the last half of that, I was also Professor of Primary Health Care at St Mary's Hospital, my own hospital in London, which is now part of Imperial College. I still carried on doing my 20 hours a week in the general practice and my on-call weekend during that last 15 years. When I finished 30 years of that, I was asked to go and do the Bristol Royal Infirmary inquiry as the medical member of the panel. And I'd had an interest because in 1987, my department was given the job of doing the resource allocation formula for allocating resources in the NHS, which is in a varying form is still used now. And I tried to calculate the death rates of hospitals to see whether we should give more money to hospitals that are having problems. That was one thing, but it turned out to be difficult. And I therefore had a department that was looking at death rates, and we were asked by the Bristol Inquiry to do the calculations, the Bristol Royal Infirmary Inquiry. The Bristol Inquiry was about paediatric cardiac surgery in children, sort of congenital heart disease that had a high death rate. What we found there was we had a 3-year inquiry. We were allocated, amazingly, £42 million to spend £14 million a year for 3 years, but we only actually spent about 14 million. The thing about it was that we needed to be absolutely sure of what we were doing, because we could have been judicially reviewed, JR, and then we would have had to start all over again with a new group, and we would have lost that £14 million. So we used, therefore, we tried to measure what illness rates, rather than death rates, i.e. morbidity rates rather than mortality rates. But what we found was that there are difficulties of measuring those things. In particular, the best hospitals are the best, the most vigilant, so they're the best at recording adverse events and so on. And when you look at it, it seems that the best hospitals are in fact worst hospitals because they recorded the best. So that is no good, and we could have been JR about that. And in addition, if you're trying to measure, let's say someone develops a pressure ulcer, you don't actually know whether that pressure ulcer was there when they came in. 40% of pressure ulcers that you find in hospital recorded are actually there when the patient is admitted. So you don't know. Now, death rates have the advantage of people understand them, very, very important for the patient. There is no question that even the worst hospitals have to record the deaths, because it's required by law that a death is registered. So there is a quality control about death rates, and the figures are found to be very accurate. And so you have accurate recordings of death rates, and of course you don't go in with it. It's something you develop, unfortunately, in hospital. And so we have measured death rates since then. And we started, the first paper we published on standardized mortality ratios, hospital mortality ratios, HSMRs, was in '99, but we actually started in the early 90s on this. And at the end of the Bristol inquiry, I wrote to Frank Dobson, who was Secretary of State at the time. I happen to know because he's King's Cross, an MP near where we practice, my practice, right in the centre of London on Marylebone, and said, could we publish them? And he wrote back, and because I said, we're going to recommend this as a Bristol inquiry, and he wrote back and said, no, you can't. And so I, as a doctor, was left with information which I'm required by the General Medical Council rules to do something about, and I was stuck with this data. And then the person who started Dr. Foster, named Tim Kelsey, came along to see me and said, if I can help get you to see the Prime Minister's health advisor, Simon Stevens, or on the Secretary of State, could you, we would be willing, he was then the news editor of the Sunday Times, I would be willing to give up my job and publish your data. And he took me to see Simon Stevens. I put the idea that, you know, they publish data with the names of hospitals and say it's not adjusted, and I'd like to publish it and say it is adjusted. Could I do it? And he said, well, I can't fault your argument. And I said, if you'll write it down, we'll do it. And we started doing the calculations, as we still do at Imperial College, and passing the information to the Dr. Foster to publish it. Now, we have about half a dozen people. They have 200. And it's partly because they have that 200 that we've been able to do what we do. We do everything we do is done free of charge. We just do it as part of the academic work. But they have to charge, obviously, for getting the stuff out of hospitals. So the point is that we now measure death rates. And it's an important thing to realise that we do that, and why we do it, that we don't do it